All right, so King Tut. This is probably the most famous Egyptian pharaoh. So King Tut was born around 1346 BC, which was over 3,000 years ago, and his real name was I never can say this right. Tutankhaten, which means living image of the Aten. His father tried to change the religion. That was kind of a big deal at the time. He wanted everyone to worship one god called Aten instead of several gods. And so that's how he gave him his name. But a lot of people hated this religion. It caused a lot of problems in Egypt at the time. King Tut had a pretty good childhood. He liked swimming, hunting, going to school. He loved board games, but he did have a lot of health issues. And so it's rumored that he was often very sick. He probably had some disfigurements. A lot of that would have been due to marriages between family members because you had to keep royal blood can cause weakened immune systems and birth defects and health issues for the children of those relationships. So, when he became a new king, King Tut's father, the pharaoh, died when Tut was only 9 years old. So, at the age of 9, younger than all of you, he became ruler of all of Egypt. And as I just mentioned, he was then forced to marry his half sister. He had to be married. So at age 9, he married his half sister for political reasons, not because they were in love. And then he continued to honor his father's religious beliefs. It's understandable that he would do that because that's all he knew. Um, if all you've ever seen is what your father tells you, then that's what you typically believe. So he wanted to continue to push that religion, and many people were angry about this. So he didn't accomplish a whole lot during his reign. So that's not what he's famous for. He was only pharaoh for a short time. He did eventually change the religion back to the Egyptian gods, just because so many people were starting riots and rebellions and getting angry, and he just wanted to please the people, put a stop to it, and make sure that everyone was getting along. So he went back to the religion. And usually, because he was so young, he had a vizier, somebody who had to give him advice. And he usually followed this advice. He really respected and cared for his vizier. So he was pharaoh for 9 years. He died at the age of 18. It was pretty unexpected. Nobody knew that it wasn't like he had been ill for a long time or was in old age. It was a very quick death. And so the funeral was small ish and pretty quick. Prior to this, when most pharaohs died, you had these big, elaborate funerals that were like celebrations, and everyone knew about it, and all sorts of money was spent. They didn't have time to put that together for him. So it was done pretty quick, and there weren't as many people. And he was put in a pretty small, barely finished pyramid because he hadn't been pharaoh that long. So what that did was it hid the tombs very well. I mentioned earlier that there were a lot of grave robbers and people that would break into the tombs to steal stuff. Well, they were huge pyramids, and so everyone knew, like, oh, that had to be the best pharaoh. He had the most money. Well, this tomb was so well hidden that people didn't even think to go look in it, and that's why it was so well preserved. So Howard Carter is this archaeologist in 1922, and he's digging around in Egypt. And at the time, most archaeologists, those are people that basically dig up lost cities and study artifacts from older civilizations to try and learn more about them. Most of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings had been discovered, and all of them had been robbed. So nobody knew very much about ancient Egypt. You went into a tomb to learn about it, and it was empty. You couldn't find any facts. But Carter had read a story about King Tut, and he said, you know what? I think he has a tomb in the valley that just hasn't been discovered yet. So he made it his mission to find this. So on November 4th, 1922, Carter found King Tut's tomb. There were some gold rings kind of dropped by the door, and so people thought, oh, maybe it was robbed. But if it was robbed, they pretty much left everything behind. it was the first tomb discovered that really hadn't been robbed. One of the things that many people did not like at the time is that the door was tied pretty well shut, and it was said to have been cursed, that anyone that opens it would bring out a curse among the people. And a lot of the archaeologists and the people that worked on Carter's team believed that and were not happy about going into this tomb. So, this is what it looked like. It was the curse of the mummy. Most men were afraid to enter the tomb. Once they saw this, they knew about the curse of the mummy, but a lot of them did it just because Carter had already opened it and they felt like they were already there, plus they were being paid to do this. In the long run, a lot of people started dying of illnesses. There were a lot of deaths shortly after this that were on that team, and so people believed that the curse had come true. So this is what the tomb looked like when he came in. King Tut was still wearing his gold mask. You can see this is where his body was. And he was surrounded by a whole bunch of gold jewelry. And there were over 3,000 objects for Tut's afterlife and paintings of what his life was like while he was on Earth. So ancient Egyptians would have believed that everything that was in the tomb was what the pharaoh needed when he died. When he got into the afterlife, you take all your possessions with you, so make sure you have what you need. So this tomb was like several little rooms full of, in this picture, it kind of looks like junk, but it would have been his most prized possessions. Again, this is kind of what it looks like. It would have had paintings on the wall, so we learn a lot. So what does this mean for us? Why was this whole thing important? Well, first of all, it was very exciting news of the time to have the first tomb discovered that hadn't been robbed, that had all sorts of artifacts. And so people started writing books about it and making movies, all sorts of things about this. But because it was left untouched, we learned more about the ancient Egyptians. We could go through Tut's belongings and see what kind of furniture they had. We could see on the paintings. We could see about food that they ate. We learned about mummies. We learned historical stories that were painted on the walls. Basically, his tomb taught us more about ancient Egypt than we had known prior to this. And there's a link in there. If you want to use it, you can. Let you know about it, but it takes you to pictures of his tomb and the gallery within his tomb so that you can see what it looks like. And that is all the information.